who founded the platform called SaveMyExams, which now helps over 2.5 million users every single month.
It's easy to see people that have built a successful business and say, oh, they got lucky. It's like, no, I bombed like 5 other businesses. You're thinking through, does your business get better with scale or does it get worse? Build a product fast and improve it fast. We have over 2 million students using the site, so we have huge amounts of data about how they use it and what they like and what they don't like. We were bootstrapped, hit product market fit straight away.
On Instagram, you have 40,000 followers, Facebook 25,000, YouTube 15,000.
It takes years to build a good brand and moments to kill it. Which marketing channels are going to be viable for that product? Like a channel. Just focus on that and really double down on it and get really good at it.
How were you finding ways to improve the platform when you had a very limited sample size to draw information from?
Can you get your product in front of those people at a cost that makes sense for what you're charging? So any way that you can sort of engineer that situation. 2 key things when you're starting out is...
Hi everyone, we're here today on the scene with Jamie Undrell, who founded the platform called SaveMyExams, which now helps over 2.5 million users every single month. Jamie, welcome to the scene. First off, I wanted you to share a little bit about yourself and about the platform for someone who may not have used it before.
Sure. So I started SaveMyExams almost 10 years ago now as a way to help students that were preparing for GCSE and A-levels, which for those of you that aren't from the UK, important public exams that you take at about 16 or 18. I was just basically very frustrated. I was working as a tutor and I was frustrated that there weren't really high quality exam aligned resources available for students. So it was very much a situation where I had a clear problem myself and I was creating a solution. It started in a very humble way, making some basic worksheets and questions that my students found really helpful. Website and always today where we help, as you said, over 2 million students every year.
And you had a bit of an untraditional start as an entrepreneur because you studied chemistry at Oxford and then you worked at Morgan Stanley, I believe, as an intern or associate. And then you scaled this massive company, you started it from the ground. Did any of that untraditional background give you a different approach maybe to business and the world of entrepreneurship?
Very good question. Yes, I think so. One of the key things that was different from me to maybe the approach that a lot of people take when it comes to starting a business was paradoxically, I didn't set out to build something big. As you said, worked at Morgan Stanley for 3 years. And one of the things that I knew I didn't want to do was be working 12 plus hours a day in an investment bank. So when I was starting businesses, a lot of it was just how do I create some independence and some freedom rather than how do I build something that is huge. And that I think actually in some ways really helped set a solid foundation because all I had to do was solve a problem for people in a way that they're willing to pay for. And over time, doubled down on that process. And that really kind of allowed me to build a sort of robust business that actually worked with good economics that could then scale over time rather than the approach that's often taken where you have a very big idea and grand ambitions and raise a lot of money, but actually the business that you build is on shaky foundations and often doesn't work out. So I think that was probably one of the most different approaches that I took relative to other people.
So how did you grow that? Because like you said, it just started with a couple of worksheets and a basic website. Was that growth something that was natural, or were the people you were tutoring, were they demanding more? Is that how what was that like?
So it was all relatively organic. In the early days, it was very much word of mouth. One of the great things about working in education and ed tech and building products for students is that if you get something right and you really solve a problem for them, they will tell everyone else about it. Fortunately, because I was building a solution to a problem that I knew really well because I was tutoring every day, I hit product market fit straight away. The product solved that problem, and the students that I worked with and then the students that found the product online absolutely loved it and kind of told their friends about it, told parents about it, told teachers about it. So that initial stage was very much driven through word of mouth, which is obviously the best form of marketing. It was absolutely free. And then over time layered on other sort of organic growth strategies, the kind of main one being SEO, which is where, in case your listeners aren't aware of it, where you effectively create content. And in our case, that would be things like study guides, which Google can index, and then students will find through their Google searches. And again, that's another form of traffic and people seeing your website that you don't need to pay for. So if you're trying to sort of scale a business without deep funding, you're often constrained to these sorts of strategies. But that, again, built a very sort of robust foundation that compounded well over time. It didn't give us a sort of meteoric rise in the first couple of years, but each year we kept making the product better, kept creating more content. And over time, that sort of really compounds up into something that's quite sizable and big.
And were you just focusing on content just for GCSE and A-levels? Because now you have IB, you have all these different programs on there, and you have questions and flashcards. When did you start integrating all of those different ways of studying into the platform?
Yeah, so over time, we've expanded into new exams, and that was really thinking, well, okay, 16-year-olds, 18-year-olds studying for GCSE and A-levels will face a certain set of problems and need a certain set of tools and resources. Chances are that if a student is taking IB or most recently AP in the US, they probably face similar sorts of problems and will need similar sorts of solutions. So that was quite a natural jump to try and take what we've done really well in GCSE and A-level into other exams. And then in terms of the kind of resources and tools, you mentioned flashcards. Those all come from the starting point of how do we help students get the best grades possible with the least amount of effort. Mm-hmm. So it comes back to really knowing the customer that you're solving a problem for and really knowing what that problem is. And then from that, your features and resources and tools, it becomes clearer what you need to build. Combined with things like customer research and analyzing the data of how customers use the website. But that's sort of why we've then built out more of a kind of a full suite of tools and resources for students over time, because it was what was needed to help them.
Were you doing all this solo at this time, or did you have a team that was helping you with this?
That recently or at the start?
At the start, like when did you start having to hire people and having so that you can do the content all by yourself?
That's a good question. It was a long time ago, so it was about 10 years ago now. Right at the start, it was me doing everything, which, yeah, again, if you're not going to raise money, you've got to be prepared to be every function in a business. And then over time, it was a process of saying, well, these are all of the things that the business needs to do, and these are the things that I'm least good at and I mostly help with at this point in time, and trying to find people to do that. And so, I think within 6 months to a year, I'd hired a first sort of person who sort of just was a generalist, helped me on the administration side, and then started bringing in, at the start, it was sort of university students to help create content. But it was that sort of mental framework of, okay, this is the business and all of its functions. Even if it was me doing all those functions, I'd literally draw out little boxes being like, okay, product manager, designer, CFO, and these are responsibilities underneath them, and knowing that over time I would then need to fill those roles with people that weren't. It's a really helpful process to go through to sort of map business needs in terms of an org chart and the responsibilities, and then over time working to find people to take those off you.
And if you're not working with a lot of capital like you weren't, how do you know when it's the right time to make the first hire?
That's a good question. Well, the first thing is you need to have enough revenue to be able to cover the cost of the hire. That's probably the most important part. And then I think it's, do you have a bunch of other things that you could be working on that are higher leverage that you're not able to because you don't have the time? And so once that's true, which it almost always is, there's always probably something else we're working on. And then it's time to identify what it is that you can stop doing and give to someone else to free you up to work on those higher leverage things. And that's actually a process that doesn't stop at the first hire or the second hire. It's kind of a mental process that I've been through all the way through the journey, right up to the point where last year I stepped out of the role of CEO and appointed our COO as CEO, partially because there were other things that the company needed that I didn't have time or the capacity to focus on in that role. And so it was freeing up that mental space to do that. And so yeah, it's something that sort of served me well right from the start all the way through to now.
And that transition of you stepping away from CEO into the role of the chair, I believe that was something that you had been preparing the team for quite a while. Is that right?
It was definitely an option. And so I hired Constance, who was COO and is now the CEO back in 2021, knowing that was always a potential outcome. You don't sort of know these things right from the start because a whole bunch of things have to work out. But that was always in my mind, that if things went well, that was a potential outcome. And I think a transition like that, if you can do it over a long period of time, where you really deeply get to know the person that's going to be taking over from you, is a great way to de-risk a process like that. I think it's quite common for founders and CEOs to, actually, I think particularly founders, get to a point where they think, oh, I don't want to be CEO anymore. This business has outgrown me, or for whatever reason, I'm not the right person. And then want to make that change now. And then you're rushed into hiring someone, which massively increases the risk that it doesn't work out. Whereas the approach that I took, it definitely was a much longer transition, but it meant that I knew Constance incredibly well and I knew how she thought, and that the team knew her really well. So actually that transition was very smooth. It may be even too smooth. I think the day that I told the team, there was sort of a collective shrug and everyone sort of just carried on with their day. So yeah, maybe not great for my ego, but definitely great for the business, because it meant that sort of process, which I've heard someone liken to sort of open heart surgery for a company, like replace was actually, a non-event, which was great.
For the earlier change of you as a founder stepping into the role of CEO as your team starts to grow, what new skills did you have to learn in order to be able to handle that role to the best of your ability? And what did you have to maybe unlearn as a founder?
Yeah, I think there's one thing that maybe I haven't unlearned to the extent that I should do, which is one of the key transitions I think that's important is you're no longer the one, or in theory, you're no longer the one telling people what to work on and what to do. So I think the first phase of being a founder, when I had a small team and it was sort of, me and effectively one layer of team beneath me, is that I was making all of the decisions on what we build, how we market, what type of content we should create. And then over time, one of the key things that I tried to do was hire people that were better than me in all of the key roles in the business. We had a great content leader who's better than me at content, have a great product manager who's better than me at product, have a great CFO who's better than me at finance. And if you hire great people like that, they don't want to be told, go and do this in a very sort of, micromanagey way. Actually, what you need to do is set a sort of strategic direction and a vision and a mission for the business, and agree with them in a collaborative way how you're going to achieve that. And then say, right, now it's your job to go and sort of make that happen in a tactical, sort of detailed way. And I think that's something that I definitely learned over time. Whether I learned it completely or well enough is you'd have to go and ask them. But I think that's definitely an important transition that has to be made as you go from a few people as a startup to a much larger team.
And how do you lead and guide those type of people without micromanaging them? Like, say, how do you shape that in direction that the company within them?
So Constance was particularly helpful in creating a structure to do that. And there's lots of different ways that you can sort of bring a group of people together and set an overarching goal. The kind of framework that we use, and this is something, again, that we constantly iterate on and try and improve, is we create a vision and a mission for the business, which is a sort of very high level statement of where we want to be, which is, for us, is how do we empower students and help them get the best possible grades with the least possible of effort. So that's kind of like the qualitative high level mission of the business. And then underneath that, we set what we call strategic objectives. And that might be things like, for us, building out a great teacher product experience we think is really important, because helping teachers is a key way of then helping students in a high leverage way, because they help many students, and it also helps us spread word of mouth, because students and parents look to teachers as an authority in education. And then for those strategic objectives, they will have a person who is directly responsible for that, often someone from the leadership team, it might not be. And they then need to come up with both the metrics that we think are important to measure that strategic objective against, and also what are we going to do? What are we going to work on? And I think that's the key bit, is like they're responsible for delivering against that strategic objective. We need to say, this is how I think we can, increase the number of teachers we have by 100%. And that will be a dialogue between the person leading that strategic objective and the CEO, or even I might be involved a little bit as well. But giving them that autonomy to come up with those plans and then deliver on them is absolutely crucial for a culture where people are accountable and feel like they have ownership and autonomy over what they work on, which then is also really the only way you can have great people in your team. Because if you have people that you're just telling them to do what you want all the time, the great people will go pretty fast.
And when you're creating those strategic objectives, do you have any frameworks for that? Like, I know there's a couple of acronyms people use when making goals. There's something similar that you had at your company?
I don't think we have any acronyms as such. I think when it comes to strategic objectives, I think about it through the lens of competitive moats. So how do we build defensibility as a business? So an example of that might be, having a great brand is very important in the consumer space, particularly in education, where there are lots and lots and lots of different options and tools out there. And so having a brand that people recognize and have heard of, ideally through friends or teachers or parents, is really important. And so back to that example of teachers as a strategic objective, ultimately that fed into the kind of the brand of SaveMyExams and the competitive moat that creates. And teachers have a very sort of high leverage effect on the brand because of the fact that they are, this trusted source of information when it comes to students and parents.
And when you're creating that brand, what should you be thinking about when you're starting it from scratch, and then when you're trying to maintain that reputation?
I am no branding expert. I'm very basic when it comes to brands. I really think about it from a product perspective and making promises to your customers that you then stand behind. And if you create a product that delivers so much more value than what a student or customer was expecting based on the amount that you were charging them, then ultimately that can only help to reinforce and grow your brand over time. So I think it's about promises and delivering on those promises, and then creating so much more value than people thought was reasonable that they can't help but feel good about your product and your brand, and they can't help but tell other people. And I think those two things are super important. And the final one being that it takes years to build a good brand and moments to kill it. So you need to make sure that you are that you make sure that your team understands the importance of those things, and that no one is at risk of undermining it by doing something stupid.
And a little bit more on brand is not only on the platform you built up a good brand by word of mouth, but also on social media. Like on Instagram, you have 40,000 followers, SaveMyExams does, and Facebook 25,000, YouTube 15,000. Was it something that you were doing from the start, is creating content on these platforms, or did this evolve as the platform grew itself?
Yeah, I would say social up until recently probably hasn't been a big focus for us. I think these businesses are often a reflection of their founders' interests and skills, and I would say social is not something that I am good at, to say the least. So it wasn't something that I sort of leaned into at the start, but particularly TikTok now is something where we see it as really important, because we want to we want to meet our customers, our students, where they want to be and in the format that they find most engaging. And TikTok is obviously a platform where, the sort of 14, 18 cohort spend a lot of time. So we're kind of investing a lot of time and effort into building a great sort of TikTok presence that can help students right there inside of TikTok without ever needing to go to Save My Exams. But
And how do you... Oh, sorry.
I was going to say there's just there's a helpful takeaway there again is a lot of people will, when they're starting businesses, will say, I have to do social because, that's where, that's how you do marketing and that's where everyone is. And even though I don't know anything about it and I'm not interested in it, I think the two key things when you're starting out is one, focus. Like just pick a channel that you want to get really good at, and obviously where your prospective customers are, and just focus on that and really double down on it and get really good at it. And that's much better than being really average across lots of different channels, especially if those other channels aren't something where you have a natural inclination or kind of a particular skill. So I think that was a kind of key lesson for me, is that it was fine not to do social, even though most people would have said that that's what I should have been doing.
And now as you're starting to grow the TikTok presence and the other social media presence, how are you balancing with the nature of the platform? Because education is quite like a serious nature, with the nature of TikTok, which is often rare, not rare, raw moments and behind the scenes moments. How do you balance that?
That's an interesting one. I think it's something, I don't see the two as mutually exclusive. I think the best learning happens when students are motivated and engaged, and you can create that motivation and engagement in lots of ways. And sometimes it's by short form video that's entertaining and conveys a point or an idea in a very succinct and memorable way. And then sometimes it's more about creating a sort of structured learning environment where students can go through different questions and build their knowledge in a way that they then build confidence for their exams. And I think both of those things are important and can be sort of reinforcing. So I think they've both got sort of the same ultimate goal, which is helping students get the best grades. And sometimes a student feels like learning something in a sort of snappy short form video, and sometimes they feel like sitting down for a few hours and really getting deep on something. And we want to be there in both of those situations.
And with that overall goal of the company, how often are you reevaluating new features to add to the platform? Because I've noticed over the past few years, there's been quite a few new feature updates, which I really enjoyed as a student. And especially as things like AI are growing, how are you integrating that into your platform?
So this is something that's going on a sort of daily basis. Those high level goals, sort of the mission and vision that I articulated earlier, we expect those to be long lived and long lasting, that will last hopefully for 5-10 years plus. But in terms of the tactics that we're employing and how we're delivering on that, teams are constantly thinking about ways of improving the experience for students, resources to do that. And so that might take the shape of customer interviews. They're always talking to students. It's data analysis. Like you said, we have over 2 million students using the site. So we have huge amounts of data about how they use it and what they like and what they don't like. And so, there's a bunch of people always thinking about, what can we build that can help students more and have a bigger impact on their revision.
And back in the early days when you didn't have so much student data and you had a lot less users, how were you finding ways to improve the platform when you had a very limited sample size to draw information from?
That's a great question. So I think that was one benefit of actually working as a tutor. And I think a key lesson here for anyone starting a business is that I think there can be a misconception that a lot of people will start a business because they had a great idea in a vacuum, just sort of analyzed some data in the world or thought about a problem that may or may exist. But actually, most people start a business, or most successful businesses get started by people that are actually working in that area and see a problem, boots on the ground. That was definitely the case for me. It was whilst I was tutoring and I saw these kind of needs that students had. And what that also does is you have the idea, but it also means that you have the intuition for the product when you start building it. Because as you rightly pointed out, when you start out building a business, you don't have loads of data. you don't have the resources to be running lots of customer surveys. And so you don't know necessarily, like you don't have a clear path forwards in terms of what the product should offer and the features you should have and the experience it should be. It all depends ultimately on your judgment and your taste and your intuition. And so having seen the problem up close with multiple students, you can then get a feel for like what actually makes sense and what they need. Make those kind of quick product decisions and to take the business forwards in the absence of all of that data that you can then have further down the line. And actually that's something you then need to balance over time. And it's something that there's no sort of formula for, because I'll have ideas and intuitions about what the product should do, but then we'll also have data and all these other things. And you kind of need to bring those together when it comes to building product at sort of a later stage.
And in those early days, what time did you start implementing the paid subscription without scaring off consumers? How did you know when it was time to pivot into that direction?
Because we were bootstrapped, I had to charge straight away, basically. And again, that was another benefit actually of bootstrapping, is we couldn't get away with, offering the product for free indefinitely and just getting users and then waiting 5 years down the line to figure out actually whether we had a business or not. I was like, well, okay, there are costs here and we need revenue to pay for those costs. So we need to charge something. I think hilariously, I think I charged maybe £10 a year in the first, when we first started.
That's a good deal.
So it was very cheap, and it was probably very badly priced, but it was important just to charge something, because I think you never know whether your product is something people are willing to pay for until they've actually paid you money. Running surveys does not actually give you an answer to that question. So I think it's very important, possible, to always try and charge something as soon as possible. And then you can obviously iterate from that. We don't charge £10 anymore. But getting started when it comes to your business model, actually what you charge is important.
And at what point did you start having to reevaluate that pricing structure? And then how did you convey that to consumers? Was it a gradual rise in price?
Yeah, I think it was pretty gradual. We've always had the approach that we want as many people, as many students, as many teachers, as many parents using the SaveMyExams platform, getting value from the SaveMyExams platform, and obviously helping as many people as possible. And so that's informed our pricing strategy as well. It varies depending on which country you're in now, but we're still incredibly affordable relative to lots of other solutions out there. We're less than an hour with a tutor, which is we hope we kind of deliver a lot more value than that. And so the actual specific number that we've landed on is kind of maybe less important than the overarching strategy, which is let's price it in a way that maximum number of people can get. Ultimately, that fuels the word of mouth piece. The more people you have, the more people who love the product, the more people are out there sort of promoting it, eulogizing about it, the faster then that member base can grow. So that's kind of how our pricing strategy feeds into our broader growth strategy.
And back to the original days, a lot of people nowadays say that it's always good to have a co-founder, because as you're growing, you can keep each other motivated. And as someone who didn't and was a solopreneur, would you have any advice for someone who was starting out alone? How did you face difficult decisions in keeping the platform growing just by yourself?
Yeah, I think this again comes back to try not to listen to the sort of best practice advice all the time, especially when it's not clear cut, when there are examples of brilliant solopreneurs and there's examples of brilliant sort of co-founder setups. Be very wary of someone that's saying this is the way you should do it. And I think for me, it came down to one, knowing myself as a person and how I like to operate. And to what I was trying to do, which was ultimately create something relatively small and about freedom, rather than solve a very large problem with a massive business. And three, just what was there at the time. Like, I didn't have a natural co-founder. There wasn't someone who I thought, oh, we should start a business together. It was, I need to start this business. I think I can do these things myself. I like having kind of the speed, like the control and the speed that comes with being the only key decision maker at the start. And let's go. It wasn't even something that crossed my mind at the time. It's like, right, this is what needs to get done, so let's do it.
And while you were building that, did you ever envision it growing this big? Like, did you still have a job while you were doing this, or were you just completely focused on this?
At the time, I was still tutoring. Whilst I was at the start of Save My Exams for the first year or so, I was still tutoring on the side, which was obviously great. One, because it allowed me to, pay my rent, but also it meant that I could take what I was learning with students and bring it back to the product, and I could use the product with them and refine it. So I think if you can create a situation like that, it is the best possible way to build a product and a business, because your learning loops are really, really tight. And it's a great way to iterate and build a product fast and improve it fast, where you can put it in front of your customers every day and get feedback on it and then go and change it, so that the next day you have a better version. So any way that you can sort of engineer that situation, I think when you're starting a business is fantastic. I was also trying to start other businesses at the same time. I had a tutoring agency for a while. We tried to start a property platform. Yeah, loads of things. So again, it's easy to see people that have built a successful business and say, oh, they got lucky, or that they must have been a genius and they did it in one shot. It's like, no, I bombed like 5 other businesses for hitting on one that worked out. So yeah, it takes a few repetitions.
What was it about those other businesses that you think they didn't work out?
I mean, a variety of reasons. Tutoring agencies aren't a particularly good business model. It's easy to get started. You're a tutor and you do a good job, and the parent says to you, "Oh, do you know I'm teaching science and maths," and the parent says, "Do you know anyone that teaches English?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure. I've got friends that I'm 22 or 23. I know that studied English." And you bring your friend in, and then they teach them English. But then ultimately, what the parents want is a consistent service and product. But actually, it's very hard to scale yourself. And the people that you're bringing in, they're doing it part time. It's normally something on the side. They're not necessarily professional tutors. And so it's very hard to deliver a consistent service. And then combined with the fact that each tutor, the way you make your money is that as the agency, is that you take a commission from the tutor, 15, 20% of what the parent will pay for their time. And then very quick, the tutor is thinking, I wonder if I can cut out this agency and just get them directly. And then, I make money, or the parent gets to pay a bit less and I make a bit more. And so your business is getting worse as it gets bigger, because at the start, it's your mate you brought in. And so they're not going to do that to you. But when you've got 100 tutors or 1,000 tutors, they don't care. They've got no loyalty to your agent. And so I think that was sort of that was probably the key reason why a tutoring agency didn't work. So yeah, thinking through, does your business get better with scale, or does it get worse? Like my point around SaveMyExams, it gets better because we can, as we get more and more members, we can spread the cost of building an amazing product over more people. So actually, as we get bigger, our product gets better, and we can bring the price down at the same time. So it's sort of this virtuous cycle that we create. Versus a tutoring agency, it gets worse and worse.
And outside of the educational niche, because you said you had some other businesses, what did you learn from those businesses that maybe you applied at SaveMyExams to help it grow where it is today?
Wow. I think one of the other businesses, not to name names or be specific, I was working with a partner who was being generous, I would call flaky. But I think a key lesson from that, when it came to hiring people, was do they do what they said they were going to do?
Right.
Are they reliable? It sounds really basic, doesn't it? You're like, oh yeah, obviously everyone does say they're going to do or should do what they said they're going to do. But you'd be amazed at how few people actually do that consistently. And it's a sort of, in some ways a bit of a superpower. Just do what you said you were going to do, and it can take you a long way for sure. So I think that was a key learning from one of those other businesses.
When you started those other businesses, were you going into it with the mindset of I want to start a business, or were you doing it with like the way you did Save My Exams of starting with a problem and then growing from there?
They all started with a problem, both from like a personal perspective in that I needed to pay rent, and from a customer perspective that there was a problem to be solved from their perspective. I think I'm a big believer that if you don't have a business if you're not solving a problem for someone. that in and of itself is not enough to create a business. It's sort of necessary but not sufficient. But you have to start with that. And if you're not fundamentally solving a problem for someone, then you're ultimately not going to be able to charge money for your solution.
And so if you're thinking about it, if you want to start a business and you're thinking about it in that framework from first principles of trying to figure out a problem, how do you know whether that's a problem that people want to pay for, that's a problem that's big enough that you can still solve, that consumers will want?
Yeah, I think there's a few facets to that question. So I think you're saying once you've figured out that it is a problem that people have and they create a solution for it, then how do you know if it's a business that's worth pursuing?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there are a few pieces to that. One, you need to figure out what people are willing to pay for that product or solution. That's part one. And ideally do that by actually charging them for it, like I did. And the other ways you can do that, if there are similar products in the marketplace, you go and look at them and see what they charge. That's always a great way, because if there are businesses out there that are already doing this and they're charging something similar, you can see what people are paying for that. Or you can go out and do customer research and go and ask people, what would you pay for this? But like I said before, that's not a great indicator necessarily of what they will actually pay for it when timed over the cash. So that's where you figure out, okay, that's what you'll pay for it. The next piece of the equation is how many people are there? Like, what is the total possible market that you could go after, or like in consulting terms, like the TAM, the total addressable market. And for some businesses, it's easier to do that than others. But like for us, it was quite easy. Like you know how many GCSE students there are every year, so that's a rough approximation for like how big your market is. And then if you times that number by the amount people are willing to pay, you get a rough sense of the whole total market in terms of a dollar amount. And then I think the other key part that you need to figure out is, we've spoken a lot about the importance of product and building a solution for problems. The other piece of the puzzle for a business, which is arguably more important, is can you get your product in front of those people at a cost that makes sense for what you're charging? So the marketing piece, the distribution piece. So an example might be like with, take Save My Exams, if it's £50 a year, and the only way you can get it in front of people, enough people to buy it, it costs you £50 to acquire each person, because Google, pay-per-click or TV ads or whatever is really expensive. You don't have a business, right? You paid £50 to charge someone £50. You've made zero money. And so I think the other thing you need to think about, is that, if you're making a plan for the business to scale, is yes, you need to know how big the market is. You need to know how much people are willing to pay for the product that you're creating, but you also need to know how much it costs to reach those people. So which marketing channels are you going to use? Which marketing channels are going to be viable for that product? And there's an interplay between them. So it very much depends on how much you're charging, right? If we are charging £5,000, then actually we could do things like sales. We could have humans calling up students and saying, "Oh, we've got this great product. Do you want to buy it?" And when you're charging £50, you can't afford to do that. So often the amount you're charging determines the marketing channels that you can actually use. So I think that's another important consideration, is how much it's going to cost to find those people.
And when you're coming up with those solutions to those problems, are there any other things that you should consider before deciding which solution to pick? Should you test out multiple ones? Like when you were starting Save My Exams, did you have any other ideas of how to solve that problem? Did you test those ideas? What made you discount them?
My memory probably isn't that good. It's about 10 years. But I think, again, this is a difference between when you're just starting out and when you're a bit bigger and you have a bit more scale. So when I was starting out, it was all gut and intuition. It was like, I think this is the best thing. I'm going to make it, and then I'm going to use it with my students. Remember, like I was seeing students every day, so I could give it to them and get instant feedback, and then iterate from there. And it was not data driven really in that sense. I mean, the data was like the feedback from a few students, but that's not particularly robust. And I think in those early days, you kind of need to have a strong opinion, a strong view of what your product should be, and like drive towards that, because you don't have the resources to be spinning up like 5 different prototypes and a whole bunch of different experiences, and you'd get stuck. You wouldn't really move forwards because you wouldn't have enough people to put those things in front of to actually get good feedback, which one was better. Whereas fast forward to now, the team will test different versions of features constantly on the site. So sometimes you might get a different experience to what your friend will experience, because we're trying to show different groups of people different experiences to see which one works better and which one people prefer. And that to do that requires lots and lots of people using it, so that you have lots and lots of data, so you can figure out in a sensible amount of time which version is better. And it also requires, a decent amount of infrastructure and team members to actually be building those different things. So yeah, that's kind of like the product development process changes quite dramatically as you get more scale.
And when you're doing that A/B testing, are you testing just very small features like different headings and titles, or are you testing a lot bigger features like the flashcards or stuff like that?
Yeah, it can be both. So it can be, like you say, kind of more what you would call like growth hacky A/B tests, where you're testing out different headlines or colors or calls to action, or it can be as big as like you see the flashcard experience or you don't see the flashcard experience. It can be quite high level.
And then once you get the feedback on that, is it quite a long time before you roll it out to everyone, or once you start to see some green flags and it's pretty much update the whole site?
Yeah, we want to get the best experiences that have the most impact for students in front of as many students as possible. So as soon as we see that we have a statistically significant result in terms of the metric that we care about, we will roll that out to everyone straight away. So it's we're just kind of waiting for that point, and the time it takes to get there will vary depending on the type of test. But yeah, as soon as we know that it's a winner, we kind of roll out to everyone.
And just to wrap this up, the scene is yours. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with our audience today that we haven't gotten into yet?
If you've had a great experience with SaveMyExams, then leave us a review. That helps us loads. And if you haven't heard of SaveMyExams and you're going to be taking GCSE, A-levels, IBs or AP anytime soon, then head over to SaveMyExams and hopefully you'll get a bunch of value from it.
I'll link that in the show notes, and I can attest personally it's an amazing platform and I've gotten a lot of help off of it. Well, thank you so much, Jamie. That's a wrap.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.